CI or AIA. You need to sign up in the back. Make sure you print legibly. I wanted to reiterate that you need to print your name legibly to get credit for it. This is the Trouble with Small session. I'm Scott Leonard. I work with the Trade Ally, as a Trade Ally coordinator with the Energy Trust of Oregon. We have Sam Hagerman from Hammer in Hand, Eric Engstrom from the City of Portland, and Jake Fry from Smallworks Studio. So we're going to do a couple little intro things here, and then we're going to have Eric speak, and then move on to Jake, and then Sam and myself. Should take about an hour and 45, or an hour and 40, and then we'll move on into breaks. Okay, real quick, I want to do some intros and introduce kind of the themes that I want you to keep in mind is efficiency, planning, and financing. A lot of these themes are kind of true throughout the entire conference. One of the things that Nicholas, who spoke at the very beginning, asked me to talk about is like, how does this relate to you when you come into this conference? Why would you come and present at this conference? Initially, I was just like, well, I work at Energy Trust, so that makes sense because it's energy efficiency. If you don't believe I work at Energy Trust, I have a shirt, a water bottle, and a bag.
You could have got that anywhere.
Yeah. I opted out to not get the iPhone case. My colleagues saw me this morning, they're like, are you just a billboard for Energy Trust? And in a lot of ways I am. But really, yeah, and as Jordan mentioned, he said, you know, energy efficiency is important, but there's a lot you can do without energy efficiency, and you can do a lot with just, you know, small living. And I was like, great, I live in a small house. And at first I thought it was just because I can't afford a bigger house. But really, my wife and I fit very comfortably into a 900 square foot home. And my parents, I think, is a good example, and they're kind of role models for me. We grew up in the suburbs of Portland, and 3 kids, and there was a big house. And once they became empty nesters, they decided to move out. And they now, the people that live in that home are people with 3 kids. And it's fitting the live, and that's what the keynote was saying at the beginning. Is small is equal to fitting the home to the family. They now live in a studio apartment in Nepal, so I congratulate them for that. So they've really taken it to the next level. Okay, so we're going to move on to the presentations. So Eric is with the City of Portland, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. As a principal planner, has been a planner with the City of Portland for 15 years, working on a variety of land use and strategic planning topics, including infill development strategies, urban natural area protection, and zoning code reform. He has a master's in urban and regional planning from PSU, and an undergraduate degree from Evergreen State College. Eric managed the development of recently adopted Portland Plan, a 25-year plan for the city's future, and he's currently leading an overhaul of the city's comprehensive plan. Eric Engstrom.
Stand off to the side. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to try and project. Are you okay in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start, once we have the screen on, talking a little bit about the government perspective on all of this, and particularly sort of where we're coming in and some of the challenges to building small, where those are coming from and what we're trying to do to deal with those. Before I go into it, though, I wanted to just sort of set the stage by talking about how a lot of the challenges, regulatory challenges that are in front of building small come out of 50 to 75 years ago, middle of the last century, when government agencies and a lot of development work and a lot of banks were involved in developing model codes and ordinances that, whether you're talking about electricity or plumbing or subdivision codes or zoning codes, there was a lot of model code development in the middle of the last century, and a lot of it was geared towards suburban scale development. And a lot of urban cities adopted those codes, and so and a lot of them are national codes. And so we've kind of got a regulatory system in place that we've inherited that is assuming like a 5,000 square foot lot in the suburbs with those kind of scale of infrastructure. And so anytime we're doing small urban infill, there's going to be a translation issue with some of those codes. And so that's what we're trying to do in some of the programs at the city, is look at that and sort of unwind some of those regulatory structures and update them to really today's thinking and time. So let's see if I can operate this. So I'm going to start with sort of the bigger policy picture of why the city cares about this. As was mentioned in the intro, we just finished adopting and updating our 25-year plan for the future of the city, and it came down to these 4 words, which were prosperous, educated, healthy, and equitable. And so that's kind of the big picture strategic thinking of the city of Portland, and building small fits into a bunch of those words, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. A key aspect of what makes a city healthy and equitable is having access to services and amenities in your neighborhood, and being able to have quality housing, have the ability to use active transportation, walking, or access to bikes, having social connections, having access to healthy food and basic public services. So when we're talking about small development, this is kind of the bigger picture reasoning behind the city's logic of how can we encourage housing, infill housing in areas with these characteristics. And to do that, we've talked about the concept of a healthy, connected city with the goal that by 2035, 80% of Portlanders live in what we call a complete neighborhood with that suite of services and access to opportunity. Today, by our measure, only about less than half of Portlanders have that. Although we're known as a city for good planning, there's sort of an other Portland that doesn't have such a good access to those. This is kind of a map of how that plays out in the city. The brighter colored yellow are the areas that meet more of those characteristics from that previous screen in terms of having walkable access to the kinds of services that you want in a complete community. So there's sort of 2 objectives here from the city's perspective. One is, how can we get more people to live in those areas that do have those services, and then how do we make it possible to have those services in some of those dark areas that don't have those services? One way to look at that from a sort of financing and marketing perspective is to step back and think like a grocery store. If you're trying to build a grocery store in a neighborhood, you want to have a certain amount of business that you know you're going to capture when you open that store. And that's sort of a standard sort of financial analysis that they would do when they consider serving an area. So one of the ways we can think about planning is look at how many people are within a walkable half-mile scale of a potential grocery store, and looking at what kind of development density it takes to create that. As it turns out, it's about 7,000 households within that walkable distance, and in order to create that. And so if you have those kind of densities, you can end up with the kind of livable community that we're talking about, because you have the market base for some of those services and amenities that people want. And we've done some analysis of what parts of town have zoning that could potentially allow this. And so it's clear that some parts of town, the zoning prevents this kind of community from developing, because we've got lower density single-family zones where you couldn't achieve those kind of infill development rates. And small-scale housing is one way to overcome that battle and bring in the amount of people that you need without fundamentally overhauling the entire character of the neighborhood with things like accessory dwelling units and smaller scale structures. So this is the same statistic I just talked about in terms of where we are today. Another piece of it on the financial side from a household perspective is that increasingly more and more families in many cities, not just Portland, are what we call cost burden, which means that they're spending way too much of their income on transportation and housing. And we used to just think about affordable housing, but now we're shifting to how do we measure both affordability of transportation and housing together. And so that brings in the location factor to it in a big way. So we're looking at the combined. So the more we can create small-scale interventions in places that are accessible already, the more we can create not only affordable housing, but affordable locations. Another factor is the changing demographics of our communities, where increasingly you need to build a flexible product that can survive a couple generations in the same ownership, where the nature of that household changes over time, going from maybe a single couple to a couple with kids to retired and then empty nest and so on. And so allowing for smaller modular kinds of housing is a potential public policy way to allow for that kind of built-in flexibility to the city. So bring it back down to ground in Portland. This is just a graph showing what kinds of housing have been produced over time in the city of Portland. The blue is single family, the purple band in the middle is multifamily, 3 or more units. The purple band is townhouses and row houses and duplexes, so the sort of medium density. The yellow is the multifamily, and then the top little blue that is just a sliver until the last couple of years are accessory dwelling units. It's just to illustrate that there's been some changes in the market, and the city's seeing that in terms of the building permit history. Last year we had 7% of all new construction permits were ADUs. That's a big change. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about then the kinds of housing that meet the kind of needs that I just described being necessary, and talk a little bit about some of the barriers on the regulatory side that we've tried to unravel. Obviously, accessory dwelling units being one of those things, and some examples of that in Portland. Another big trend that many people have seen, it's getting a lot of press, is the increasing demand for small-scale multifamily apartment units, in particular in close-in locations close to transit. And we're seeing an emergence of what I describe as the bike-oriented apartment building with the first floor bike parking and very small units, which depending on their location may or may not be affordable, but that's been a major trend in recent years within the city of Portland, and it's part of this overall sort of suite of what's possible. Some other pictures of that kind of development. Another form of development that has been allowed for a long time in Portland is what we call the corner lot duplex or plex. Anywhere in Portland in a single family zone, if you have a corner lot, you're allowed to legally either make that into a row house or do a duplex in that situation. So it's different than you can go beyond the accessory dwelling unit limitations when you have a corner lot. And it's something that has been actually in our zoning code for more than 100 years, I think, but it's been utilized a lot more in the last 20 years. Tiny homes, there's been a lot of discussion within people who work on zoning codes as to how we define a dwelling unit. And right now, one of the big issues that we've talked a lot about is it has to do with kitchen sink and certain utilities being in the unit. And so if you want to have, for example, a primary building with a detached bedroom, that's still potentially a single dwelling unit. And so there have been a number of people, some of which are in this conference, I think, who have played around with those definitions and tried to push the envelope on that. And, there's, I think, some interesting work that could be done to look at codes and what the definition of dwelling unit is, because that's one of the drivers of what's allowed and what's not allowed. And for example, could we consider things like several types of kitchens or kitchenettes being variations on the definition of dwelling unit? So that goes back to the sort of the basic codes that we all have shape a lot of what gets built, because one of the big barriers is the basic definition of a dwelling unit. I wanted to put a slide of Dignity Village up. I don't know how many people are from Portland who are familiar with this, but this was a homeless camp that was sort of upgraded into a tiny home community through self-help and with some assistance from the city. And I just wanted to show this because historically zoning codes essentially make this illegal to live in this kind of environment or to do sort of from the grounds up. If there's a homeless community that wants to do that kind of thing, it's very difficult. And we still haven't solved that from a zoning point of view in Portland, but I think it is part of the larger sort of affordable housing strategy of the future, is to look at the complete continuum from the tiniest house to the biggest house and lowering that barrier of entry to housing and creating that situation where a community could self-organize and develop some kind of housing. And there are in the third world kind of environment, there's a lot more sophistication of these kind of models, and we're just starting to see some of that in this country, I think, and we're probably going to see more of that. So all this is kind of on the theme of small-scale solutions, because that tends to be what's missing from our continuum of what kind of housing we have as a city. We've produced a tremendous amount of low-density, medium-sized homes in the 2,000 to 4,000 square foot range, but And we probably have a supply of that kind of housing to last us another 50 years, but what we don't have is the variation from that. So we've looked at a couple things just in terms of how the city operates. One is to look at fees. An example of that is over the last couple of years, the city has had essentially a system development charge holiday for accessory dwelling units. And that's one of the reasons why that production of that kind of housing has taken off in the last couple of years. System development charge, for those of you who don't know, is a fee that's levied on every dwelling unit. And so because it's done on a dwelling unit rather than a square footage base, tends to make it harder to make your small units financially viable. And so by removing that, that's had an effect on the financeability of projects. It's also, so we're looking at ways can we gradiate or reform in the future some of those rules. I'm not sure if this has been formally announced at all, but there's, the city has just literally in the last few days, there's an ordinance going to council to extend this SDC. It was set to expire in July of 2013, and they're going to extend it to 2015, and there appear to be the votes on the city council to do that.
Awesome. Great.
Another big push has been looking at our subdivision code, and over the last decade, Portland has ratcheted down, especially in the multifamily zones, the allowance to do single-family housing in multi-dwelling zones on incredibly small lots. So you can do accessory dwelling units on single-family lots, but if you're in a multi-dwelling zone, you can consider the possibility of doing a whole subdivision on a piece of property with very small housing. And we've seen, I'll show some pictures of that. But that's been a major development in the last decade that honestly a lot of those codes were reformed in 2006, 2007, and then the economy collapsed, and we really haven't seen a lot of examples of that yet, but I think we will in the next few years. An example, a piece of that is allowing common greens or sidewalk access to homes rather than requiring a full cul-de-sac on a piece of property that's going to be subdivided. Another piece of this is our off-street parking regulations. Obviously, for cities that have a requirement for off-street parking, either 1 or 2 parking spaces for every dwelling unit, that's a huge financial disincentive for small-scale housing. And for those of you building in Portland, fortunately, for the most part, we do not require that, especially for the accessory dwelling units and any location that's near transit. And that's unusual. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that right now, with especially the larger apartment buildings. But that's an aspect of the financial viability of these kind of projects. The last thing I want to mention is, besides messing with regulations, the other thing that the city has been focusing a lot of energy on is sort of showing by example, by helping the private development community develop guidebooks and have contests of design to show prototypes of what can happen and actually get them built. So some examples of that were the courtyard design competition from a few years ago, and then prior to that, the Living Smart Small House contest that the city sponsored. So I mentioned accessory dwelling units. A couple details of the city's codes. A couple years ago, we changed the size limit to allow up to 800 square feet of size. Prior to that, it was a percentage of your primary house, and that was making it really hard to do ADUs on properties with small houses. And so we changed that, and that's helped, I think. The other major thing that isn't true in most cities that have ADU provisions is Portland does not require any rental tenancy restrictions. A lot of cities make it illegal they require that there be an owner-occupant in the primary house in order for there to be an accessory dwelling unit. And Portland does not require that. So if you own rental property, it is legal for you to do an accessory dwelling unit in a rental property situation. I mentioned the courtyard housing competition. A big motivator there, again, was the family size housing unit, and looking at if we're building small infill houses, can we get some better common space for that are more child-friendly situations. In a lot of cases, the common area in multifamily development is essentially the area you need to store the cars, which isn't a great play space. Some people get pretty creative with it. So the courtyard housing competition, again, kind of pushed what's possible in terms of more pedestrian-oriented and kid-friendly and community-friendly spaces that could be those common areas. So this is about how you arrange multiple small houses on a small site. And we published an infill design guide that goes through detailed recipes for what you are allowed to do under city codes. A lot of times people are focused on what you're not allowed to do, but this guidebook is essentially the recipes for what does work, and we spent a lot of time trying to vet these designs with our different building and code experts. Again, just different configurations of tight, small-scale houses with common areas. So there are some examples of this starting to emerge in the market. We were really interested to see the project on Division Street that I believe was built by D.R. Horton show up. That was interesting for a couple reasons, not just because of its design, but because of who was doing it. Another example, which is probably the first real development that follows some of those courtyard housing contest principles, which is Sabota Court in southeast Portland. And it's essentially a private street with townhouses, but it has this 2 lots reserved as common space essentially that can be developed further as an amenity to the community, and a very non-traditional street design to give that space more functionality for the community. And then I think Eli Spivak is at this conference, but his project in Cully Grove is an emerging other example of that kind of clustered housing around a common, in this case built kind of on the urban agriculture piece, using that open space for community gardens. So that's my slideshow. Pass it on. All right. I think we're taking questions after.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end, but is there anything someone burning to ask right now while we transition? I have one question. Okay, let's transition on.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
next up is Jake Fry from Smallworks Studio. Jake is the owner of Smallworks. It's a Vancouver, BC-based company dedicated to building sustainable, attractive, modest-sized family homes built to an exceptional standard. Jake found the inspiration for his company when he was working as a Finnish carpenter for a builder, building some very good homes, but at the same time, very large homes. Monster home is the term that Jake used to refer to this home's energy, because not only did they consume a lot of energy during construction, but also post-residency. Jake saw the opportunity to not only build small, but also build sustainable. Since he founded Smallworks in 2005, he's worked with the City of Vancouver and other municipalities to help zoning bylaws on his experience and interaction with literally hundreds of potential small home clients. Jake Fry.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Just give me a sec here. I need help with your computer.
Yeah, I saw it opening.
Yeah, so did I.
There are 2 PowerPoints open in that.
No, those are the other.
Those other ones. Okay.
Oh,
There it is.
there it is. No? Sam, can I talk about your company? There you go. Your PowerPoint works. You must right there. That's you. Okay. So how do I watch that?
Alright, to bottom left.
Great, thanks. So I was going to preface this by saying I'm a very optimistic person, and that I took the title, but I took the title of The Trouble with Small to heart, and I've called upon all of my partial Romanian ancestry so I can have a good European dialogue about troublesome things, because knowing from my grandfather that we know how to do that. We know how to talk about trouble. This is a house we built for the Olympics, and this is actually the first official laneway house in Vancouver. This happened in 2009. This house is actually subsequently moved and put into a legacy location. But I quite like this because it talks about, it has the whole thing in a nutshell. Behind it is the heart of, I think, what you might have heard the term Vancouverism. There's been a lot of really interesting urban multifamily development in Vancouver. And here it sits in the heart of it. And this is kind of, I think, the future of Vancouver, and the kind of at heart what the city might begin to look like in the future. And but that said, to talk about small, you have to talk about big first. And which button do I hit? This one, that one. How about this one? How about that one? What they say about being optimistic? Can you help me?
I don't
This is
know.
a attractive picture.
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to talk about, oh, I can go there? Okay, great. I'm going to talk about big. So we have, the big thing in Vancouver and in the lower mainland is that we have a big problem, right? We have sprawl, and we have a lot of it for such a small area, and you can sort of see the area in the back. And we have a big increase of population, and we're looking to have to basically find another 200,000 homes in about 20 years. And we're built out. Now, when you look at the blue area, this is sort of the single family. This single family has been, I won't call it devastated, but you're down about 2.2 people per household, where they was really built for 4 people per household. You can see a core of the city, which you can see is completely built out with multifamily. If not completely, it's certainly very dense in comparison. And so the opportunity that we have is addressing what this area is of a single family. And the other thing, which I spoke earlier, and I think I was cautioned by my friend Jim here that I'm not supposed to mention this because people may come rushing up and take over Vancouver because of land value. As of last week, the median land price per city lot is $935,000 per household. And that basically occupies about 80, if you put down your full deposit, if you had a mortgage, and you had a median income, you'd be looking at spending 80% of your income on housing per month. You know, it's just unfathomable, right, that anyone lives here. And in fact, really what this what it speaks to is that there is, you know, it's been really interesting what's happened. We have an influx of people into the city. There's a lot of, it's a very beautiful city. There's a lot of land speculation. And what's basically happened, what we, you know, talking about the trouble, is that what we've done is we've created, and I mentioned this term earlier, kind of an impoverishment due to the affluency of the city. And so what we have is also, you have this single family neighborhood, people buy, they're speculative properties, and what we get a lot of demolition, and we got a lot of building of large homes. Because people are parking their money and they want to put money into the property that's going to hold its equity. So, along comes laneway housing. We were advocating it for a number of years, probably started in 2004, 2005. It finally passed as a bylaw in 2009, and it becomes sacrosanct, and basically it opened up 50,000 building sites in Vancouver. But, because this is themed around trouble, we'll talk about a little bit of it. It's a complicated bylaw, and you have a very big peg that you're putting through a round hole, and as time's gone on, and there has been some negative reaction along with a positive reaction, that peg has become a little bigger, and the hole that we're trying to jam in is a little smaller. But this is very typical to, you know, what city planning department wanted to see, which was this sort of quaint little cottage in the backyard. We find that we do need to get into a second story because of the size of the lots to get the square footage. And generally, the average scenario is that a 33-foot lot, which is the typical city lot, you can build 500 square feet of living space. You have to accommodate one car parking, which is a relaxation on the part of the city, and as such, that parking tends to be interior to the lot. Lots do get wider, and as such, you can build up to 750 square feet once the lot gets over about 42 feet in width. But when we started the company, we were thinking we were going to do these beautiful, cute, lovely, charming cottages, and we would do lots of these, and these would be the grandmother suites, these would be for students, these would be for rental, and that we would see a very modest footprint, for lack of a better term, and a very modest change in the cityscape, because most of the neighborhoods are quite mature, and there's lots of trees, and they're really quite quaint, especially on the more expensive west side of town, but they're not any less so significantly on the east side. And we would have, you know, nicely finished interiors, and these would be really livable spaces. That said, the problem we have is that it's still an expensive proposition. The building permit for a 200 square foot building and the cost to service it is the same as it is for a 1,000 square foot building. So the challenges we have to keep the cost of these little houses down are problematic. Significant cost of lumber. Lumber's gone up in Canada. Labor's gone up. I was mentioning the average carpenter. The charge out rate for a carpenter is about $60, maybe even $70 an hour. And the wage is certainly more than half of that. City wanted a lot of infrastructure upgrades. We're trying to change a city that has a single groundwater sewage system into a diverted system by 2040. Every homeowner has to pay about $13,000 to participate when they build on their property. The burdens of the code requirements, obviously, I think there's challenges here that I remember Eric talked about on the phone, where we're trying to put big house safety issues into a small house, and that has challenges. And then on top of that, there's people's expectations, and rightly so, of really trying to capture as many mod cons as possible and really high-end finishes, and also very sophisticated mechanical systems, because we build relatively sustainable homes. Within the Build Green program, we're a platinum builder. So what we found is then people started building larger laneway homes, which was fine because they're still not very big homes, and they're not significantly bigger than a 2 or 3 car garage, but it still had a bit of an impact, and it wasn't necessarily what the bylaw was originally intended for. But the upshot, and the great part of that, is that these become wonderful starter homes. And we're seeing about 80% of our clients, and we have roughly about 30% of the market, tend to be family situations where adult children are paying for a mortgage or taking out a line of credit on the parents' property, and they have a co-ownership agreement, and the kids are basically, well, young adults, have their own home. And conversely, people are tending to be able to cash out, empty nesters cash out on the raised cost of land, retain their money and not have to put it into another home, and actually invest in their children's property, create their own domicile, and have money to look after themselves as they age. But it's still, this too comes at a cost. And in full disclosure here, and I'm happy to share these numbers, we're looking at a construction cost after taxes, everything in. This is from a telephone call to a finished house, fully landscaped, around $300,000 Canadian. And we can see the construction cost does comprise a bit, but this is all basically servicing soft costs. And a house like this, I know, had quite a high-end finish, but that said, we're still dealing with a very complicated building put into a very small cavity, and that charge costs things. So what we did to mitigate that was a number of things. I was always interested in prefab, so we set up a factory, found a large number of efficiencies with this factory, and are able to produce ourselves and keep a number of labor costs down, and as well have a really fine quality product. I mean, the one thing about a flat pack building, and these are open wall systems, but we get to site, we get lockup done in a week, so from slab to lockup a week, including roofing, and we get a wonderful moisture content in the wood, which is a big deal because we do get about twice the rain you do down here. And that's a big, big issue around warranty and servicing in the future, and also the health of the home. And then in this facility, we're also, the client can elect to have a pre-insulated building. So we have a proprietary building envelope system that looks at an outboard insulation system. We get super good performance out of this. And within Canada, we have an Energuide rating, which is much like Build Green, and it's on scale. And we're getting about 86 in our homes. And that's, for a small home, we feel quite outstanding. The other thing was we have a really rigorous process that we go through with our clients. So everything down to paint color has to be chosen before we begin construction. The good side of that is we also give a fixed price and a fixed schedule for a project, and our feet are held to the fire on that. So again, these are some cost assurances that help to balance out the expense for the client. And the upshot too is that we find that we're getting really low deficiencies, and we can really include a lot of features in a house and really kind of go that extra bit, because again, looking at the cohort of people that we're serving, they're really interested in a house for themselves, so they want it as elegant as possible. And we really strive for that, really focusing on the interior finishings, a lot of built-ins, which is important. I mean, these houses really have to be treated like a little sailboat. And I think we have some these are some shameless promotion shots, some pretty elegant little homes. These are on the larger size, and I think that the town has been relatively good about letting us be fairly diverse in architectural gestures. And a home like this is actually a family home, where there's a full family living there with 2 kids. It's 750 square feet. This is actually only 429 square feet, and there's a young man who lives in there. His family, it was a Southeast Asian family, and they were very concerned that their eldest son would leave the property, and as such, they pooled the resources and built him a little house in the back. And this is another family home. And again, here you have this, it doesn't really show up as well here, but this is a nice gesture between the two homes. And what we have is, again, this one, they just had a child about 7 months ago. And then this is like a co-ownership agreement where the parents inherit the house. So there's 3 generations have owned this property. And the handshake deal these have is when they have 2 children, they're allowed to have the big house and the parents will move into the And again, some more interior shots of some of the homes focusing on those finishes. But I think, that said, there are these negative things. There has been expense. There has been a lot of, and I'll be very candid, bumps in the road with some NIMBYism. We've done a lot of studies, and with this, we actually started up a nonprofit group as well called Small Housing BC. And we found that generally it's the sort of the like and the don't like are somewhat down the road, a little heavier on the like than the dislike. But certainly, as people begin to use them, and as they begin to see family people using them, increasingly it's become far more accepted within the community. And I think what the upshot of that too is that we're going to see, and this is a very typical Vancouver laneway, we're going to start to see this become populated, become far more of a kind of a pedestrian muse, a bit more of a neighborhood here, and in some ways somewhat of that, as Ross talked about, that sort of urban courtyard, urban pocket neighborhood. I think we'll start to see that in the best case scenarios, and see some vitality, little shops and so forth. I will try this. I'm sure it won't work, but it's that optimism. But this will yak at the end. I'll just run this for you. So this is probably our best case scenario prefab. It's going to run. Try one more time, and then I'll abandon it.
Medium.
Medium? Is that one of those rules?
Is it from a physical file?
It's a QuickTime movie, I think. Okay. Anyway, so it's been fairly successful, and I'll just end up saying that we've in the last 3 years 600 permits taken out, 320 houses built, which is really good. Those are great numbers for us. And out of that, we're seeing about 300 projects done. 200 of those would be redeveloped into whole lot, which is in keeping with about 4% of the house turnover, the single-family house turnover in Vancouver, and about 109 where they were able to keep heritage retention. So those are good numbers, and we feel pretty positive about those. Thanks for your time.
I think it got closed. Yeah, that's it.
It's open actually.
Yeah, I guess it's connected.
Okay, while we're getting that going, Sam Hagerman from Hammer and Hand. For 30 years, Sam has worked as a builder, business owner, and a green building proponent. In 1995, he co-founded the contracting firm Hammer and Hand, emphasizing sustainability in the built and work environments. Sam is also an active in the national and policy arenas, serving as president of Passive House Alliance, participating in Citizens Advisory Committee that helped further progressive challenges to Portland's ADU policies. 2 of Sam's tiny house projects were just featured on the city's Build It Green tour, which just happened here in Portland. He's now building the Karuna House, a national case study for Passive House, LEED Platinum, and Net Zero Energy designations. Sam Hagerman.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I think this is great. We were talking earlier about, I was talking with Jordan earlier about how we tried to push this idea forward 10 or 15 years ago in any significant way. We would have been tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. So I think there's been a lot of evolution in thought. I'm always fond of trying to take a 40,000-foot perspective on things. So we're in the midst of a great progression. Is the required paradigm shift that we're going to need to go to get where we need to be in 2030 and 2040 and 2050. So, my perspective on this comes from the perspective of a builder, developer, business owner. So I got involved with a small, and this is to back up a little bit, I'm going to try to mention some points that I've had with this whole issue from different perspectives that have been trouble for me. So this is where the trouble concept comes into my presentation. In 2008, we strategized at Hammer and Hand to try to diversify our business a little bit. We were terrified of the marketplace at that point. I don't know if everybody remembers, but it was super heated and clearly unsustainable. And I looked around in the market, and what I do, which is home building and remodeling, and realized that the ADU changes that were made to the code in the 90s didn't go far enough. They were too hard to develop. They were too small. They were too expensive in terms of SDCs. And that was the environment where we're seeing permits issued for these at 8 to 12 a year. So I looked to get active and try to develop some sort of traction around making these things easier to do. I was fortunate to be asked to be on a committee that was Eric headed up, a regulatory improvement committee, charged with changing Title 33 planning and zoning code to make it more friendly or more sustainably oriented. And these changes that Eric spoke of came out of that committee and were adopted by City Council. At the same time, City Council had the bright idea to waive the SDCs, so that all sort of converged, I think, in 2009, is it? Yeah. So it's really thrilling to hear that the SDCs probably will be given another 2 years of moratorium. I think that's, if anything's responsible for everybody being here today, you can point to one thing. It's basically the change to that code and then the moratorium on the system development charges. But this conversation's happening in cities across the United States and in Vancouver, obviously. We're all trying to solve the same problem. So from a builder's point of view, these are the only building lots we have left. There's the urban growth boundary here in town. So this is a tremendous opportunity for everybody. So that was the trouble with that was I was looking to try and save my business basically from the oncoming recession. And it's that and a number of other things have really helped out quite a bit. The big problem I see on a day-to-day basis operationally from a business owner's point of view is that, I can look at the calls that come into my office from people who want everything from ditches dug to kitchen remodels to passive houses to ADUs. And I can look at all those things, we can categorize this stuff, we're kind of OCD about it. And I can tell you what the conversion rate is from this type of call to how frequently those turn into real jobs. And ADUs are the worst. And but it's an interesting phenomenon because it's backwards. Kitchen remodels have a high conversion rate. Everybody wants their kitchen remodel. There's a million kitchens out there. And it's making donuts and it's great work and whatever. ADUs are super exciting. Look, we're all here. We're all talking about it. We have a lot of energy engaged around it. And I go out and talk to people about it. I feel like I have a job title that's called an ADU educator. Because I go out into the community, I get a sales call, I want to put an ADU on my property. So I try to do a little phone pre-qualification, like these are basically what we're talking about. This is kind of the price. These are the forms these things usually take. And then I go to the property and we talk about it, and it's exciting. And then the potential project crashes on the rocks of financial reality. Because we don't enjoy the tremendous amount of equity that cities like Vancouver have. We're still recovering in a real estate price point-wise. So it really takes equity in your house if you want to finance one of these things. To further the problem, the valuation question is not worked out in the marketplace. So I think your average appraiser on the street just assumes that an ADU is an illegal thing that should be bulldozed. Because there's no consciousness about it. Taylor Watkins was talking about this earlier, who's an appraiser who's been in a leadership position on this issue. And so we don't have the comps in the marketplace because there aren't enough ADUs. We can't get comparables, which means we can't prove the value, which means we can't get the money lent to build. So there's once I was in the midst of this effort 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I thought, great, City Council just adopted the RIDE Cap 5 proposal, SDC moratorium's off. We're just going to see these things coming out of the woodworks. And we did. It was a big increase. We went from 12 to like 60-something permits in the next full calendar year. But I expected to see hundreds the first year because they're such a great idea. So that was a big roadblock. I realized that was, we just took one big step and then just stopped. From my point of view, most of the ADUs that are getting built are being built by cash or non-standard financial transactions. There's only just a few lenders that are wading into the marketplace. In an early effort to try and solve this problem a couple of years ago, pestered the mayor's office and got Skip Newberry, who's no longer with the mayor, to organize a meeting with some local privately held mission-driven banks. I won't mention any of them. And we had a meeting with some mayor's staff people, some PDC people. We had the meeting at the PDC. We brought representatives from 4 banks at the vice president level in. And I gave them a PowerPoint about, here's an ADU. I can build you an 800 square foot house in your backyard. You can rent it for $1,500 a month. And it's gonna cost you $150,000. And if you borrow 80% of that, your payment will be $700 and taxes and insurance and some other stuff. So you're gonna be netting, you can put an extra house in your backyard and you're gonna make at least $600 a month. And everybody was like, God, that's a great idea. We'll get right on it. And there was just tumbleweeds after that. So finally, a couple of the banks are stepping forward. I can talk to you offline if you want to hear more about that. I haven't had a client actually get financing for an ADU yet. I've certainly sent lots of people to different people. And so hopefully we can get this last kink worked out. The big trouble that I saw when I heard Eric say that was like, oh great, we finally got this financial thing kind of worked out, and the moratorium's going to, on SDCs is going to expire in June, right about the time we get some financing. So we'll see. It's all a long-term development. So the valuation versus equity concept is kind of working itself out. To mention a specific problem though, these are houses. And so they have all the expensive parts of houses like kitchens and bathrooms. A kitchen in an ADU is just slightly cheaper than a normal kitchen. A bathroom in an ADU is the same as a bathroom in a normal house. Those are expensive parts. So is the plumbing hookup, the sewer hookup, the electrical panel, all the circuits. So there's the big expensive chunks don't scale down with the smaller square footage. You can make nice finishes, and these are great, but they're still expensive to put in. This is an ADU that we built in the Alberta Arts neighborhood that rents now for $1,600 a month. It's a 2-bedroom, 800 square foot building. So there's proof of concept in the marketplace. There's lots of us who can point to ADU projects that rent, you know, for $1,300 to $1,600 a month. It's there. So we're finally, what I've realized from other work that I've done in the wider world, that this proof of concept thing is important. You can say I have this great idea, but until you put them in the ground and you operate them and you see the checks cashed, you're not going to get anybody who's going to give you money to believe you. So we're finally getting to that point. One of the things that's also troublesome about smaller structures is that they're harder to make energy efficient, which is a little counterintuitive, but let me explain. If you have a big multifamily building, you can fit 50 units in that building. And there's a really great ratio of the treated floor area, or the square footage you have to heat, versus the amount of envelope to the outside. And we live in a heating climate, so we have to spend energy on heating. So we have this great ratio of, you know, almost negative to treated floor area to skin. That gets worse and worse and worse the smaller the structure gets. So we get a structure that's a 400 square foot house, and it's got a horrible ratio of treated floor area to exterior skin. So it's way less efficient. So as Jordan said first thing this morning, this is not about multifamily. I get it, because they just win anyway. They're already small and super efficient in a lot of ways. But this is, from an energy geek's point of view, one of the problems that we have to deal with. And there's a little bit of mental gymnastics to sort of solve this problem, but it is sort of counterintuitive, because one of the things that I do, if I put another hat on as a passive house consultant, is that's a building energy standard that is measured by kilobtus used by the structure per square foot per year. So that's all you have to do in passive house, is just use less than this many kilobtus per square foot per year. So that equation gets really hard to solve for on the small house side. They're difficult to do, as a matter of fact, and we're working nationally to change the standard so that there's just kind of the standard is not changed in that the numbers don't change, but at some point, or you can use less than 5,000 kilobtus per square foot per year, or whatever the number is. So if the number gets suitably small, you don't have to stick to the per square foot thing anymore. You just have to use less than the grand total. So hopefully we can see that sort of evolving up in the near future. The strategy that we've used in this ADU in particular, and it's probably way too small for everybody to see, but this is built in sort of some of the detailing we used in the past about. So this material here, this gray material that's under the slab here, this is a concrete slab, this is dirt, this is insulation right here. It goes out here and then goes up over the entire building, comes back down. So then I have a 2x6 wall that's insulated, and then exterior foam, the same thing that Jake's doing at his projects up north. And we're getting really excellent airtight results and really great R values. We had some metering on this building, and I think it was less than $50 to heat this building for a year. So you can get some pretty good results. Again, the trouble with this is this has its own electrical meter, so who cares what your tenant's paying? Just kidding. But there is that kind of thing. You have to think like a landlord sometimes when you build these, and so that's a new mental gymnastics for some folks. And while I've got Eric here, here's the basic floor plan. This is the first floor, main entry door. In this case, this whole thing opens up like an accordion. Living room, kitchen, bathroom around this corner. The stairway comes up. We have a laundry closet here, and 2 bedrooms. And this is a really great little structure. It went up quickly. I think it 3.5 months. It's performing well beyond expectations. And we left it a really simple box and just moved a couple windows to the outboard side to give a little interest from the outside. That was Michelle's or Dan's idea here, the architects here in the room. The problem, here's the insulation on the foundation. Maybe I should get through these slides before I keep yakking. So the construction sequence on this is, here's the insulation that's under the footings and the slab. So this thing actually doesn't touch the dirt at all. None of the concrete touches the dirt. Everything's isolated with insulation. There's the shell going up. We're using normal plywood, but we're air sealing the seams. There's the interior dense pack cellulose insulation. There's some spray-in low density foam insulation in the roof assembly.
Let's see if we can get that.
Is that the movie? Maybe it'll work for us.
Yeah, we'll see.
You're more optimistic.
We'll be optimistic here.
So, which is too bad because we have this, and he has a similar one of his projects, and compare. You can see the value of prefab when you place it. So this is pretty conventional up to this point, except for the foundation insulation. And then you see, of course, rain. And then you'll see the exterior foam go up here in a second.
A lot of rain.
There we go. Does it get all the way to the siding?
No, it doesn't include the siding.
Oh, well. So, that's available on our website if you really want to watch it again. One of the not huge problems, but I'd like to know Eric's perspective here. So this is a point and a question for you. It seems to me like there's very little, other than the historic districts here in Portland, there's very little design-driven things in Title 33 that actually say copy the eaves, copy the roof pitch, copy the siding. Because that's one of the things we have to do in ADUs. The ADU is supposed to be the child of the existing house. So have the same DNA, basically. Which is all well and good. You think about, there's a number of perfectly reasonable things about that. You want it to blend with the neighborhood, you want it to not stick out too much, but there's some of us in the audience who really like modern design that's quite compelling. You can't do that at all. So is there a chance, and I kind of know the answer because we talked about this briefly in RICAP a few years ago, and everybody was like, no, we can't ask for that because then they'll just shoot the whole thing down. Because we were already going to ask for square footages to be increased. So, I mean, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. At the time, we thought, let's accomplish this other thing first,
Yeah.
because we didn't want to have that battle. But the time may be coming for that discussion.
Cool. That'd be great. All right. I think we're solving all kinds of problems.
You heard it. Small steps.
Yeah, baby steps. So, those are, hopefully I mentioned 5 or 6 problems here, trouble spots. And we're in the process of, if we haven't solved all of them, we're working through them together. So it's great to see everybody here and keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
Want to go see down there? Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to read my own bio. I think that's odd.
You want me to read it?
No. Well, like I said before, I'm Scott Leonard, and I work with Energy Trust of Oregon. For the last 5 years, I've been on the new construction department. And during that time, we've moved from a performance-based model. And when I say performance-based, that's offering incentives for things like meeting Energy Star to a prescriptive to a performance-based, which is what's called the Energy Performance Score. Hands in the air, has anyone heard of EPS or Energy Performance Score? That's great. So now we have some market presence, and that's what we want to hear. So real quick, I'm going to wrap things up. It was a little bit of change gears from what these three have talked about. I'm going to talk about some of the incentives that are available. Energy Performance Score for new construction and also for existing homes. Are there any home performance contractors in the room? All right, so we now offer EPS through the Home Performance Contractor Network, and also how Energy Trust defines an ADU. And a little bit about the incentives that are available for the new construction side and then also on the existing home side. Real quick, since this is an Energy Trust presentation, I want to talk a little bit about what Energy Trust, the organization, is. I'm not going to read this, but basically we provide energy solutions and incentives to customers at Pacific Power, PGE, Northwest Natural, and Cascade Natural Gas. And here are some great things that we've done. Also not going to read this, but basically what this slide says to me is Energy Trust is working to save a lot of energy, put jobs back into the economy, and big picture, save the planet. So when I'm talking about these incentives that are available, this is really important because you do need to be in Energy Trust service territory. Basically, if one of your utilities qualifies, so either the gas or the electric utility qualifies on one of the utilities that I mentioned before, PG, PAC Power, Northwest Natural, Cascade Natural Gas, then you are a ratepayer, and you pay into a public purpose fund, and you basically have access to these incentives. So this is just a grid. It's Cascade Natural Gas is the blue one. PAC Power is this kind of lightish, greenish yellow one. The I-5 corridor, that shows Northwest Natural Gas, and then the green is Portland General Electric. Okay, so we're going to talk home. That should say EPS, so the graphics aren't working, but new construction. EPS so far to date, we've done 900, which is the best we've done so far, so that means there's 900 EPS in the Oregon market. When I say the Oregon market, Energy Trust service territory that I mentioned before is about 82% of the population is served by Energy Trust. And when we started, I believe it was in April of 2009, since then we've done about 2,300. Right now we have about 22% market share within that 82% Energy Trust service territory. The existing homes EPS, this is great. This has been coming for a few years. Those home performance contractors that just raised their hand, they're now able to offer EPS. It just started about a month and a half ago, and the plan is to get about 500 to 1,000 out in this phase one. So look for the existing homes EPS to come out. Basically, EPS works for 3 reasons: to show a home's energy consumption, to show its financial impact, so the operating costs, and to show the environmental impact, the carbon impact. And I'm basically just reiterating that slide that I just said. 3 reasons why it's created. And then now we have the existing homes EPS. It's also used to motivate customers to make energy efficiency improvements. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk or show the existing homes EPS. It is a little concerning that all of my graphics aren't showing, because this might be very difficult for me to show you what's happening. But just so you know, an energy performance score, it's not a certification or a program. It's not a cash incentive. It does have a cash incentive associated with it. And it's not an alternative to Energy Star or an alternative to home performance. It's meant to work with other certification programs. When I say that, it works with all of these certification programs that are in the market. It's basically a quantitative way to show energy consumption. Everyone's heard of Energy Star? Yes. It's actually the second most recognized brand name in the country. Can anyone guess what the first one is? Coca-Cola.
No.
So here in Oregon, we typically work with Energy Star, Earth Advantage, with Bill Green up in Washington. But basically, the EPS is meant to quantitatively show you that home's energy efficiency claim. So Energy Star is claiming that they're 15% above the Oregon Residential Specialty Code. So how do you know that? You have a big home that's 15% above, big home that's saying it's 15%, or you have a little home 15% better than the code. Well, we actually have a quantitative way to show the home's energy consumption. Oh no, it doesn't work. So this is going to be difficult. And I came actually prepared for this. If we could just pass these out real quick. I just wanted to do this because back in high school, people would be like, pass this out, pass this out. So there's not enough for everyone. So if you could just take one and share with your neighbors. Oh, and I need one. So it says, what does EPS tell you? EPS basically works in 3 different ways. It's looking at the home's estimated monthly energy costs. This home here is showing that it's operating at $114 per month, and it has estimated annual costs at $1,368 operating costs. And then it breaks down both your natural gas and your electric operating costs. So you have an idea of how much energy is being used and how much your utility is charging for this. And so on the new construction side, which we're looking at here, this is a way for a builder to say, here's how much your home is going to use. Kind of like a miles per gallon sticker is on a car. You say, okay, here's how well this home is going to perform under normal operating conditions. Because if you get into a car and you floor that thing and you're pulling a trailer, yeah, it's not going to get 21 miles per gallon. Just like a home. If you move into the home and you have a normal operating cost saying it's $114 a month, you have 4 kids, they're all taking showers, they all play their Xbox, it's not going to cost $114, it's going to cost more. So this is an asset-based rating system saying this is how well this home is going to perform under normal operating conditions. And I really apologize if this isn't working. You can almost kind of see it, which is
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's not like it's just totally,
Long enough.
yeah. I know, is there anything you can, it's gonna make my presentation a little different. I think they all got used. Yeah. That's all right. I can talk for it. It's not a problem. Let's just go on to the next thing. Interesting. So I apologize about that, but make sure you take my business card, and if you have follow-up questions, I can send you this presentation, and we can go through it. Actually, yeah, I have the PDF version, but that might take a while.
Shut up on the fan.
So what we're looking at now is we're looking at what the estimated energy cost will be, and then it's going to look at what the energy consumption will be. So for those of you that have a sheet, we're looking at an energy score of 60. This is saying that it has 60 MBTUs it's going to use estimated per year. This score is a new construction EPS, so it compares it against itself. So it's saying if you would have built this home to code, say you don't put in the added R value insulation, you don't put in the tankless water heater, you don't lower your U value in your windows, you build the same home, same square footage to code, then it's going to use 89 MBTU. So the delta, the difference between the 89 and the 60 is your consumption savings. That's what's important on the new construction EPS, is showing those savings in consumption. Does the same thing on the carbon side. Show you all here. Where it shows you the difference between the amount of tons of carbon that you'd be using per year, and then it breaks it out between gas and electric. On the back side, if you flip it around, this is a really great new feature that we have in there. It shows the energy efficiency efficiency features as is. So this one's listing out the R values in the home. It's showing the U values in the window, the efficient lighting. So it gives you an idea of the home's features and what contributes to that score. A really good marketing tool for a builder or a realtor is they can go into a home with this sheet, say, look, this home has 0.30 U-value windows, point at the window, and a homeowner can recognize that that's what's contributing to this home's score of a 60. And then this is some energy efficiency terminology on the back to make it a little more consumer friendly. I'm guessing the existing home's EPS isn't going to work either, but just to explain the difference between the two, an existing home's EPS is taking an asset rating as is of the home. So it's basically saying, here's how the home is comparing right now, and then it's making a projection saying, if you were to put in X, Y, and Z features into the home, make these improvements with your home performance with Energy Star contractor, then you're going to have a score that's so much better. So it's going to be something that's going to drive change. It's going to drive that homeowner to make energy efficiency improvements. And then once the improvements have been made, they can then get another score on it saying, here's how your home performed before, and here's how it is now. It's always an asset rating, so it's always as the home is right now. And here's how you compare the two against each other. They're meant to look very similar. And I'm going to take questions just at the end, just so I can get through this because we're a little short on time. Just to make sure I'm all the way through it. Home performance with Energy Star, like I said before, it's 500 to 1,000 scores that we're hoping to do. It's a $50 added charge on the existing home side. ADUs. This is how Energy Trust is defining ADUs. On the new construction side, and this is very much thanks to Jordan Palmieri, as you mentioned before, we used to have incentives that were only at $200 per ADU, and now they max out at $4,400. Basically because he came to us and said, this is something that you should be doing, and we listened and we talked about it and it makes sense. So incentives are basically treated like new single family. As long as they meet these requirements, they're detached from the main residence, they have their own separate address, that can just be like a unit B, and then meeting the local jurisdiction requirements. This actually isn't true, I'm sorry I put that up there. It does not need to be separately metered. We have that up there for tracking purposes because Energy Trust looks at your consumption based on a meter. So we just look at it a little different. So we track that it's metered together, but it doesn't matter that it actually is separate. Okay, existing homes ADUs are a little bit different. There's basically 3 different ways you can define an ADU. One is retrofitting the existing square footage within the conditioned envelope. So that would be like taking a home and separating out. So you'd have a unit on the first floor and a unit on the second floor. Converting unconditioned ADU, that would be if you had an unfinished basement and you went ahead and finished it, that would be conversion. And then there's the build out. There's an addition on the ADU. That's the 3 ways we define an existing home's ADU. And so the incentives that are available for these, we'll talk first about the existing homes incentives. This I'll leave in the back. This is actually a grid, because when I'm saying there's insulation available, I'm not going to tell you the exact incentive available for each thing, but there's a grid that relates to that, saying if you're going to do a retrofit within the conditioned envelope, we can qualify you for incentives for insulation, windows, gas fireplace, water heater, appliances, solar PV. And if you're to do a conversion, a lot of the same incentives available. And then if you're going to do an addition, a few less, but gas fireplace, water heater, all the solar, and appliances. So that's basically, when I first was talking, saying that there's some trouble with small, the financing, or just getting money to do these projects. That's why this is, Energy Trust is here to help with some additional incentives. These are cash incentives that are available. Also strongly encourage you to contact the Oregon Department of Energy, because there are tax credits that are available, or the federal government, because there's federal tax credits that are available too. Right now, it's kind of a downer slide to end with, but ductless heat pumps are not available under ADUs. The intent is because we're trying to displace the primary current electric heating system. So if you're going to build out an ADU, it's not replacing that heating system. And another bummer that this is my very last slide, but this is talking about the new homes incentives. I'll leave this on the back. But basically, and this is all on our website, on Energy Trust website, incentives are available on a sliding scale for energy performance score. So if you're going to do anything above code, literally anything, if you go in and upgrade your lighting, you can get a few $100s for that. All the way up to the advanced performance home, which is talking about a very high insulated shell, R60 in the attic, very high efficiency but size small heating system. There's 4,400. There's also solar incentives that are available. These are available typically through a solar trade allied contractor and then offset to the builder. Line item out and offset. I believe that's my very last slide. So I said we're going to take questions. This is basically questions for the entire group. So you can ask questions of any of us. So I'll take my name off of there. And we've got about 10, 20 minutes left for questions. So you actually had a question over there while I was talking, so I'll go.
I was just wondering how you're coming up with those numbers. Are you using energy modeling?
Correct. Yes. So two different types of energy modeling going on. On the new construction side, it's REM rate. And then we take the REM rate outputs. It's basically the percentage improvements for each of your heating and cooling and lighting loads against a code home. And that those outputs and percentage improvements are put into a conversion, and that's how we output into MBTUs. That's on the new construction side. On the existing home side, there's a software called Cake Systems, and it's a modeling. Or sorry, you're next.
Yeah, Sam, this is a question for you. On your foundations, I noticed that you had foam under the entire, even the load-bearing walls, and I'm just curious, is that a really high compressive foam? How did you get that?
Yeah, it's expanded EPS, expanded polystyrene, styrofoam cup stuff. It just comes in a bunch of different densities. And there's two ways to, you can just get EPS and it goes type 1, which is the soft stuff, all the way up through type 29. And then the higher stuff is sort of recategorized as geofoam, so it's made to be built on. And it has a different numbering category, but it's the same material. So if the material you're using is geofoam, then it's okay to build on pretty much. But that starts at like type 13 and goes up to type
Like
29.
1,000 pounds per square foot?
No, like 1,000 pounds per square inch.
Wow.
Yeah. They build bridges on it.
In the back?
Just a comment about the geophones. We did a project in Woodburn with the same detail. And in that small jurisdiction, there are no ICC reports currently that I know about that say you can put foam underneath a footing. So there's all this data out there, but the ICC hasn't done a report. So you may sometimes get into issues with, if you're in a small jurisdiction, especially with building officials. But like Sam said, in Europe especially, I mean, where soils are bad, they just bring in stacks of this stuff and put bridges on them, and they've done testing, and the compression strength, I think there was a project done in the 1960s, their compressive strength is actually stronger after they dug it up and tested it.
In regards to ADUs, sounds like the biggest stumbling block is the financing piece, or has been. Is that because there's not a separate lot underneath it, so the lender doesn't want to secure it separately, or what's your take on what we need to do to free up the money to get that going?
There's a bunch of aspects to that problem. One is that there's not, you can't do a value-based in terms of recent sales, so there's not a lot of comps in the neighborhood. They're nearby, although they're loosening up on that a little bit. There is a weird requirement in Fannie Mae that if it's a second structure, it can't be any bigger than 30% of the primary structure. So even if we're dealing with a local lender, like there's a couple institutions I know that have this, they don't plan on ever packaging these and reselling them, so they're not technically required, even by their own mission, to make it compatible with the Fannie Mae guidelines. But that's their only fail-safe. That's their only safety. It's the only people that are going to buy that as security. So they just refuse to do it under those guidelines. So what we've moved to is really imprising them as duplexes, and they're allowing us to do that a little bit more. A duplex of an equal size. And then the third way is to do an income-based appraisal, which is something that Taylor Watkins has been working really hard on. So we're just moving the ball forward slowly.
Yep. In the back?
I have a question for Eric about parking requirement, how that's waived if you're within a certain distance of a bus line. I'm wondering if there's any talk or there would be consideration for having that same rule if you're by a bike boulevard.
It's been discussed, there's two or three different situations. The ADUs, no matter where they are, have a reduced parking requirement, but there's a second rule that applies to all construction, that's the frequent transit proximity. And honestly, there's a big push right now to undo that, so there's a pretty active discussion with a number of neighborhood associations in Portland that are pushing to have that code revised to require parking again. So that's a little bit uncertain right now.
I guess I have a question for all of you. Do you find that people that want to build ADUs are more into sustainability and having efficient homes? Or do you have to build the homes in this way because the code requires to do so?
Well, I'll jump in. This is from the Vancouver perspective. I would say, we do offer a number, I think at our base level, we're still building a very green home, but we do offer a number of upgrades. And usually because we're at a price threshold, those are the first things to go. And I think it does sort of feed into that question, or a comment that Sam made, not to be too glib about it, but if you're already building small and you're already looking at an energy bill of, our houses are maybe $40 a month, $30 a month. Are you going to spend $10,000 in the current market to save $5, right? And off a monthly bill. So that's the reality. So generally, people want a family home when they're coming to us, and they're going to try and get as good as they can, but they're not going to go above their budget.
Yeah, that's, the sustainability issue, I think, is maybe a little bit more present in people's minds because they're talking about building a small house, and they've already thought in a non-standard way about their property and their living. So maybe there's some correlation there, but I don't think it's a direct result of an ADU. I think it's just the general consciousness that developed at the same time.
Got a question for you, Jake.
Sure.
You prefab all of your units?
Yeah.
And what sorts of flooring system do you use?
Generally, we're using a TGI cassette, so we use and then we'll deck that with infill pieces. So we won't get to completely, where there's something like a staircase. We're not going to get into that because it's just for the amount of work to build a staircase on site. It's really miles to do that because you're inevitably, those are the little tricky, difficult areas in the floor and roof cassettes. It's better just to assemble on site. The idea is to get the gravy done in the prefab system and keep the moisture content down. But certainly all the walls and most of the big floor panels and roof plans are prefab.
Any more questions?
Do your ADUs have extra sound insulation on the alley side? I see some that are right there at the lot line. The garbage truck's going to come down there within inches of the building at 6 a.m. along with all other vehicle traffic that uses garages access by the alley.
There has been requests from that. I mean, it's if you're already living in one of these units, you have to remember you're in a very residential area. I mean, it's not like a garbage truck in a downtown where at 5 o'clock in the morning you got somebody dumping 3 cubic yards of bottles, right? So it's not really that big a consideration, and those garages are intended to be used for cars, and as such, I mean, there is, it's the morning, it's 7 o'clock, the garbage truck's not going to come by any earlier than that. So specifically to that point, no, but some people who work night shifts have said, hey, can you put some extra sound insulation, and then we'll do that. So it's a kind of one-by-one basis.
To continue that, I thought that I saw maybe a double wall on that ADU, the time lapse. I thought I saw 2 layers of plywood, or
No.
it just changed.
Yeah, I think it was just an optical illusion.
Because I've seen there's some other property that you're doing double wall.
Yeah, we are. We've done a lot of double wall construction with cellulose infill.
Jordan.
Jake, you mentioned that I think it was over 6 years in Vancouver, there are about 600 ADUs.
3 years. 3 years.
3 3 years, 600.
permits have been issued, and 300 are occupied currently, or, low 300s.
Are there any incentives around bringing housing?
Not really. I think the incentive is just the pent-up need for housing. There is a bit of, there are a few rebates from power, like something similar to, if it meets a certain performance, it's a $2,000 rebate. And if it's the end of the selling cycle, we'll maybe put a little rebate on. But generally, no. It's a new product in the housing market, and it's just warming up. But no one's pushing it. They're trying to monitor what the need is, and it seems the need's fairly significant.
There was another one in the back.
I'm wondering for jurisdictions that have owner occupancy as a requirement, do you think how big a barrier then do you think that poses compared to Portland where Filipinos can do it?
I think we saw the numbers go up after we removed that. And we started out with an owner occupancy requirement and essentially quietly removed it about 5 years later, and there was no outcry. So, but I think it does have a depressing effect on the numbers if we have that requirement. That's part of the problem with the lending, is a lot of lending institutions assume that we have those same rules and try to apply them.
Right here.
I have a code question. Is there a possibility in Portland or anywhere else of doing small cells of tiny houses, say like 4 tiny houses to a lot, like a building or something like that?
Yeah, I've heard that question comes up pretty often, and it's not something we've done right now, but it's definitely sort of ripe for discussion. Right now, people are getting around that by the definition of what is a dwelling unit, and sharing the kitchen and doing some creative kitchenettes in the secondary units, so you can sort of do that. And we've also, the other way to do that is through the sort of micro subdivision route that I was describing, but that comes with some more utility expenses if you're doing actual lots. You can do essentially you can take a 5,000 square foot lot if you have the right zoning and subdivide it into 5 tiny little lots, and that has been done. Not in a single family zone, and that's the question, is whether the neighbors would accept that kind of infill, the trade-off between size and activity. It's an unknown, and we've been a little shy about doing that because of that concern that there might be a backlash on it.
You ever run into, I know in Colson east side, there's a lot of shared garages that were selling, shared garages with common driveways. Have you run into that? And are there any special conditions for that other than, obviously, both owners want to convert, or you have one owner that wants to convert with the permission of the other owner?
Yeah, it's all about whether there's an easement there and whether you can negotiate one.
But you can't build an ADU half on one person's property and half on the other person's property and have it be connected across the property line.
No.
Without some, I can imagine anything's possible, but that seems like,
You could build
that seems like a Rubik's Cube to me.
You could do an attached ADU if you have a firewall at the middle with 2 separate ones.
Right. Yeah, because some of these are going, to 0 lot